greatness has a brutal price. The minds that bend reality rarely rise from comfort. They are forged in pressure, in isolation, in silent battles no one applauds. Vision is often born in darkness, shaped by pain sharp enough to fracture the ordinary spirit. Behind every towering achievement lies a story of endurance the world never saw. Before the rockets, before the billions, there was a staircase, concrete, cold, echoing with heavy footsteps. A thin, awkward boy cornered at the top, no escape. Bigger hands grabbing from behind, laughter turning violent, fear flooding his chest as the world suddenly shrank into fists and gravity. Then contrast it with today, a titan of industry, a man who commands rockets that return from space and land upright on steel legs. A billionaire shaping the future of energy, transport, and civilization itself. The same human being who once woke up bloodied in a hospital bed now moves markets with a single sentence. The ringing in his ears, the shock of impact, the silence after the fall. He was small. He was hunted, entirely alone. No rescue, no protection. Just the cold realization that the world could be merciless and that no adult was coming to intervene. Forget the net worth. Forget the company names. Strip away the headlines. What remains is a child discovering something terrifying, that intelligence does not shield you from cruelty, and that suffering can arrive without warning, without fairness, without reason. So the question lingers, how does a boy who is beaten unconscious transform that humiliation into a vision that stretches beyond Earth itself? How does relentless pain become fuel instead of poison? What shifts inside a fractured mind to prevent it from collapsing forever? Some people break in moments like that. Others are rebuilt, hardened, refocused. In the space between despair and decision, a different future quietly forms. And from that hospital bed, from that violent fall, a story began that would alter industries and challenge gravity itself. This is the story of Elon Musk. Pretoria, South Africa, 1980s. A culture carved from steel and sun, rugby fields, dusty streets, a world that valued toughness above all else. In that environment stood a quiet boy with his head buried in books, thin, distracted, and far more interested in galaxies than playground games. He did not fit the mold. His mind moved differently, faster, deeper. While other children spoke about sports and status, he was calculating possibilities, absorbing encyclopedias, memorizing facts about physics and distant planets. Conversations felt slow to him. Social cues felt illogical. The gap between his thoughts and his peers created an invisible wall. So he retreated inward, into science fiction, into fantasy worlds where intelligence was power and logic always prevailed. Books became armor. Early computers became companions. Inside code and stories, there were rules, systems, predictable outcomes. In those structured universes, cruelty had no authority. Home offered little refuge. The atmosphere was tense, demanding, emotionally unstable. A father whose words could cut deeper than fists, expectations without warmth, criticism without comfort. The place that should have been a sanctuary often felt like another arena where he had to defend his worth. At school, intellectual curiosity was not admired, it was targeted. A quiet boy who answered too many questions, who preferred reading during recess, who matured physically later than others, became a glowing target. Strength ruled the hierarchy. Difference was punished. Sensitivity was hunted. Strip away the future wealth, the controversies, the headlines. What remains is a lonely child who wanted something simple, to be left in peace, to explore ideas, to build small digital worlds on a screen. Beneath the towering ambition was a boy searching for understanding in a place that offered none. But isolation has consequences. The private sanctuary he built in books and binary code could not shield him forever. The fragile fortress of imagination was on a collision course with the brutal physics of the schoolyard. and the impact would be far more violent than he could ever predict. Fear became routine. Each morning carried a knot in his stomach. The walk through the school gates felt like entering hostile territory. He scanned faces, calculated exits, measured distances. The day had not even begun, yet his body was already bracing for impact, for laughter that cut, for whispers that followed him down the hall. What started as mockery evolved into pursuit. It was no longer random teasing. It was organized, intentional. A specific group of older boys who decided he was prey. They watched him, waited for him, cornered him between classes. Their goal was simple: assert dominance, crush the quiet outsider who dared to be different. Cruelty escalated into strategy. They found his closest friend, the one fragile thread of connection he had managed to hold on to. They threatened him, hurt him, forced him to act as bait. The betrayal was engineered. Lured from hiding by someone he trusted, he learned that even friendship could be weaponized. Living like this rewires a brain. Chronic stress does not fade when the bell rings. It embeds itself. Hypervigilance becomes permanent. Every sound is a potential threat. Every shadow carries risk. His young nervous system adapted to chaos, constantly predicting disaster before it arrived. No teacher stepped in. No authority dismantled the hierarchy. Complaints dissolved into silence. At home, there was no protective shield waiting. He was left to process real physical danger with the emotional tools of a child. The message was clear. Survival was his responsibility alone. Something fragile began to disappear. Childhood softness, spontaneous joy. In its place grew calculation, observation, emotional restraint. When violence is possible at any moment, innocence becomes a liability. He learned to analyze people the way he analyzed systems, searching for weaknesses, escape routes, leverage. Pressure built from every direction. School offered humiliation. Home offered instability. Isolation tightened around him like a vice. The environment became a sealed chamber, heat rising, no release valve in sight, and inevitably, when pressure has nowhere to go, it explodes. The explosion came without warning. A staircase, narrow, unforgiving. Hands seized him from behind before he could react. No time to calculate, no space to escape. His body was lifted, overpowered, then hurled downward. Concrete met bone in a violent cascade that echoed through the building. Impact, then another, and another. He tumbled helplessly, gravity turning him into an object. At the bottom, it did not stop. Kicks rained down on his head, on his face. Over and over until light fractured into sparks. Sound dissolved into a distant hum. Then darkness swallowed everything. He woke in a hospital bed under sterile lights. The air smelled of antiseptic. His face was swollen beyond recognition. Breathing felt heavy, labored. Pain pulsed with every heartbeat. Doctors spoke in low tones about damage, about procedures, about reconstruction that would take time and leave marks that lingered for years. But the deeper wound was invisible. Lying there, he confronted a brutal truth. Intelligence could not shield him. Logic could not negotiate with fists. The world was capable of unchecked cruelty, and fairness was not guaranteed. The illusion of safety shattered completely in that quiet room. Returning home did not bring relief. Instead of comfort, there were reports of harsh words, of blame, of hours of verbal attack that pressed against fresh injuries. Physical agony fused with emotional betrayal. The place meant to heal him compounded the fracture. In the darkness of his room, silence stretched endlessly. A broken body, a bruised spirit, no applause, no rescue narrative. Just a boy staring at the ceiling, absorbing the weight of what had happened, feeling the abyss open wide enough to swallow an ordinary future whole. That moment was a cliff edge, broken, bleeding, alone. A lesser spirit might have accepted the role of victim, carried the identity forever, allowed the fall to define the rest of his life. Right there, in that suffocating stillness, everything could have ended before it ever truly began. But in the quiet aftermath, something shifted. Lying in that silence, he reached a cold realization. If the external world was chaotic, hostile, and beyond his control, then the only territory he could truly command was internal. If he could not dominate the environment, he would engineer his own mind into a fortress no one could penetrate. He made a decision that most never consciously make. He refused to be defined by the boys who broke his body. Their violence would not become his identity. Their cruelty would not script his future. In that refusal was power, a line drawn in the sand of his own psyche. With no protectors coming, radical self-reliance was no longer optional, it was survival. He understood that waiting for rescue was a losing strategy. If escape was possible, he would design it himself. Geographic escape, intellectual escape, psychological escape, he would become his own architect. The pain did not disappear. It transformed. Anxiety became focus. Anger became drive. Fear became energy. Instead of imploding, those emotions were redirected into obsession, into long hours of learning, coding, reading. Suffering turned into fuel, volatile and relentless. His gaze shifted outward, beyond Pretoria, beyond South Africa. North America emerged in his mind not merely as a distant continent, but as a gateway to possibility. A place where technology shaped the future. A place where he could rebuild himself in a new arena. There was another gift hidden in the wreckage. When you have already endured humiliation, violence, and betrayal, the fear of failure loses its edge. What more could the world take from him? The worst had already happened. Risk began to feel almost irrelevant. And from that hardened perspective, a larger vision crystallized. He would build systems so powerful, technologies so transformative, that the small cruelty of ordinary people would fade into insignificance. If the world was broken, he would dedicate his life to redesigning parts of it. North America was not a dream, it was a mission. When he arrived, there was no comfort waiting. He slept on office floors, showered at the YMCA, lived on cheap food while building his first company, Zip2, line by line of code. The endurance forged in childhood became operational, relentless, almost mechanical. Business was not a game to him. It was survival logic applied to markets. When boardroom coups threatened to remove him from his own creations, when power shifted suddenly at PayPal, he did not panic. He assessed, adapted, calculated. The same cold focus he used in hallways now guided him through corporate warfare. Then came 2008, the financial crisis. Tesla bleeding cash, SpaceX on the brink after repeated rocket failures. Bankruptcy hovered inches away. Observers expected collapse. Instead, he remained unnervingly composed. Pressure was familiar. Scarcity was familiar. He had lived in worse emotional climates than this. Critics mocked him. Journalists predicted failure. Short sellers bet against him publicly. Industry veterans dismissed electric cars and reusable rockets as fantasies. But compared to being beaten unconscious as a child, headlines were noise. Words could not wound the way concrete had. Yet the drive carried a shadow. Control became essential. Sleep became optional. Expectations became extreme. The need to dominate uncertainty sometimes translated into a demanding, unforgiving leadership style. Trauma can fuel greatness, but it rarely disappears without leaving sharp edges behind. Still, the vision materialized. Rockets that once exploded began landing upright from the sky. Electric vehicles once ridiculed began reshaping global transportation. Gigafactories rose from empty land. What started as a mental fortress became steel, fire, and code changing the physical world. The wealth that followed was not the origin story, it was the byproduct, a consequence of resilience compounded over decades. His billionaire status was proof of concept that a mind refusing to surrender to early destruction can bend industries, defy gravity, and rewrite what is considered possible. This story is not only about one man, it reveals a universal truth. Trauma is raw material. It is neutral at birth. In one direction, it becomes an anchor that drags you beneath the surface. In another, it becomes a forge, heating and hardening you into something unrecognizable to your former self. The pain you wish never happened may carry hidden instruction. Betrayal teaches awareness. Rejection sharpens self-reliance. Failure forces innovation. The very experiences we beg to erase often contain the blueprint for our greatest transformation, if we are willing to study them instead of running from them. Look at your scars differently. The bullies, the setbacks, the humiliations. They were not invitations to shrink forever. They were involuntary training sessions. Brutal, unfair, unwanted, but formative. They tested your limits long before you realized you were being prepared for something larger. There is a stoic truth at the center of all of this. You cannot control where you start. You cannot control the cruelty of others. You cannot control sudden chaos. But you possess absolute authority over your response. That internal decision is the only territory that truly belongs to you. Real victory is not revenge. It is transcendence. It is building a life so disciplined, so expansive, so impactful that the people who once tried to diminish you become irrelevant footnotes in a much larger narrative you authored yourself. So ask yourself, honestly, what are you doing with the pain you have been given? Are you allowing it to fracture your confidence and define your ceiling? Or are you refining it, shaping it, using it as fuel to construct something that outlives the memory of what hurt you? If this story shifted your perspective on your own struggles, subscribe to Success Stories. Leave a comment below about a hardship that forced you to grow. Until next time, keep building your inner fortress.